Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Serge, and welcome to another episode of Search for the Truth. And our goal with the podcast is to educate people, empower people to take in charge their health and their life to get better. Because there's so much confusion out there, and our goal is to go over this confusion, these myths, and help people figure out what they need to do. And today, I'm really excited to have my following guest, Dr. George, with us. He just released a book. Welcome to the show, Doc.
Thank you so much, Dr. Serge. I really appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. So first of all, can you tell us a little bit about you, yourself, your doctor, and why you decided to write this book, which we're going to talk about a little bit today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a family doctor. I live in the city of Austin, Texas. I've been practicing medicine for about 15 years after my residency. I've worked in largely in a fairly good-sized multi-specialty clinic. Eventually worked my way up to becoming the head of the family medicine section, and then eventually the person in charge of the quality program. So chief of quality, overseeing population health. And kind of one of the things that I learned is as things are progressing along in our society, chronic disease is actually increasing, and we haven't been able to contain that. And so, just based on just looking at what we've done to date, the focus on a healthy diet and exercise, and we continue to preach that message. Exercise regularly, eat healthy, but the disease of chronic diseases like diabetes and hypertension, colon cancer, Alzheimer's, these things are just continuing to increase year after year. And so, kind of wanted to add a little bit of a different perspective in terms of what might be contributing to that.
Yes, and like I said, you wrote a book. I'm going to put the cover on the book actually on the screen so people can see it. Right there, the title is really catchy to me, Health in Flames. And the whole concept of your book, you talk about fires. I think you talk about the urgency of what's going on into our society today, into our healthcare. And one of your first chapter, if not the first chapter, is our health is on fire, right?
Yes.
So we need to do something right now. So what is causing the rise of all those different chronic issues that we see in this country?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's great. I think as I mentioned, all these different chronic diseases are increasing over time, and some of these chronic diseases are not even necessarily related to one another, right? So It makes sense on some level that hypertension and diabetes are increasing because that's tied to our increasing waistlines, and so as we gain weight, we're going to see a rise in those diseases. But we are also seeing rise in Alzheimer's and insomnia and depression and anxiety. And on top of that, and that's just the chronic disease, then there's the cost of the chronic disease, which is also rising year over year. So what's contributing to that? I make the point in the book, hopefully a compelling case that you'll hopefully come to appreciate, that it really is driven ultimately when you do that root cause analysis. Yes, it is because we're not exercising enough. Yes, it is because we're not eating healthy enough and we're not sleeping enough and we're too stressed. But what's causing all that? And what I come to the conclusion is it really has to do with consumerism. And specifically what I mean by that is mindless consumerism. And so there's a tendency whereby we pursue, kind of short-term gains through mistaking pleasure for happiness. And as a result, what ends up happening is we're actually compromising our health.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I wanted to put on the graph, actually, on the screen, this graph. This is the first figure from your book.
Mm-hmm.
That speaks to me because this is the life expectancy for different countries, right?
Yes.
We can see at the top is Switzerland, 86.3. And at the very bottom, which is a big drop, actually, the US.
Yeah. And if you look closely at the graph, I know the dates probably come out a little bit small, but that last date there is 2017. So this is before the coronavirus pandemic. This is before the opioid crisis, which has also affected our life expectancy. But what we're seeing is really not only the rise of chronic disease, but in fact, our life expectancy is also not keeping on par with other countries that also are leaving a lot on the table. I'll say they're not necessarily doing a lot better than us, but in a lot of ways, we're all kind of, even in those countries, even though their numbers are somewhat better, we're still seeing the rise of chronic disease and increasing healthcare expenses year after year.
Which is really unfortunate. And which brings me to my next question. Because one in your chapter, it's what's causing the fire. And
Yes.
you talk about healthcare, you talk about food industry, you talk about the toxins. And one of the things that I didn't realize is technology. And
Mm.
you actually stated a stat that the average child today spend about 7-8 hours in front of
Mm.
the screen. So that was like mind blowing to me, actually.
Yes, yes. Sadly, I got to say before, I have to preface this by saying technology has really improved our lives in many ways, and so I don't want to discount that. In particular, it's done two major things for us. One, it's really made it so that food insecurity is not the issue that it once was. And it's not to say that food insecurity is a non-issue today. Even in America today, there's some issues that it does, it's not a completely solved problem. But compared to our ancestors, we do so much better thanks to some of the technological innovations that we have in place. And then secondly, thanks to the technological innovations, we also have much less chronic disease, mainly because of vaccinations and antibiotics and some things that we're doing better to manage chronic disease. So technology has definitely had a positive impact on our health in those aspects. However, going forward, when you think about the pillars of healthy living, it really comes down to roughly three things, right? Basically, healthy diet and exercise and good sleep. And then if you want to add a fourth one, it's probably managing stress. Okay.
Yeah.
And when you think about the ability of technological innovation to improve on these things, what you're going to find is that there's definitely a shortcoming there. In other words, food is actually already perfect for us if we're eating whole, real food, which is the way we're meant to be eating, which is the way our bodies have evolved to eat. Any kind of technological innovation to improve food is only going to make it less healthy for us. And that's what we've seen that's happening, with the with more and more processed foods, for example. What we're seeing is the rise of chronic disease, right?
Yeah.
In the same way, we have technological innovations to make things more convenient for us, but those conveniences are actually slowly robbing us of opportunities for exercise. So, for example, you see that we have roads built for cars going every way we want, and it's very convenient. But on the other hand, you've really kind of lost the opportunity for exercise. So I think so. What the basic point is beyond a certain level, technology is not what we really need. What we really need once we've met our basic needs and overcome starvation and we have enough security and food and housing. What we really need is just to be freed to be able to consume real healthy foods and exercise regularly and sleep well. Nothing that we need technology for. Those are things that are free to us today. So.
Yeah, good point. So would you say that the food industry is to be blamed for the rise of chronic issues? Because a lot of people seems to blame, okay, the big corps, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we are the consumer. We are the one who decide what to buy. So if, as a whole, we will stop buying that food, that can shift the system, right?
Yeah, a good point, Dr. Surge. What I would say to that is, in some sense, the food industry is making it so much harder for us, right? But at the same time, what are they doing really? They're really just trying to sell a product, just like any other company, any other business is doing. But that's one of the fundamental problems that I'm seeing and trying to point out in the book is that when you have, a profit motive. All they're trying to do is make some money, right? And so if you have a company that's trying to make money, just like any other industry, you're going to try to make a product that is so enticing and so, in this case, very delicious, so that your consumers are going to continue to want more and more. It doesn't matter about the nutritional content of that food to them, not necessarily. What matters is, can it bring in more revenue? And the way they do that is by making food as tasty as possible, by really stripping of its nutrients, making it convenient. So you can make it convenient by being able to pop it in the microwave and be able to get it ready in a minute. Yeah. They also make it so that it's preserved for long periods of time, adding preservatives so it doesn't spoil. And so these kind of things basically point to a problem that I talk about in the book, that in this system of capitalism where we are encouraging companies to basically where we are trying to pursue the goal of making more money, we're basically come to sort of shoot ourselves in the foot. And I'm a fan of capitalism, so I don't want to give the wrong impression here. But what I'm trying to point to is that we as consumers, we are in charge. We can take charge and say, hey, you know what? If we can control the mindless spending and actually be able to use that money and set it aside and actually invest it, you can actually be free of the confinement you have to your employer. And so that's one of the ways in which you can potentially be more liberated to be able to spend the time for cooking healthier, exercising, and sleeping well. So bit of a long-winded answer, but I hope that you're able to follow that.
That covers it all. Thank you for that. So one of the things that I see with people, you may see that too with your client, is, they get older and they come to me and say, I have aches and pains. I don't sleep as much. I don't have as much energy because I'm getting older. So two questions for you. One is, do you agree with that as you get older, you necessarily get sick? And then second, do you feel that the increase in life expectancy is the reason behind the rise of those chronic diseases?
That's a good point. And actually, we have, ample evidence from studies of various, societies, and even people who live in more of a hunter-gatherer societies, that they can actually live a long life without any kind of chronic disease. So you have people that are living, largely a pre-industrial sort of lifestyle, that if you provide them enough food so that they're not undergoing starvation, and you can protect them from infectious disease, which are two big things that wasn't true in the pre-industrial era. True. But if you could do those two things, then largely what we're seeing is those people are living free of any kind of chronic disease. They're not seeing, it's actually very rare to have diabetes. There's some statistic that says that 70 to 80% of diabetes is largely preventable if we lived a healthier lifestyle. Same thing, you're not seeing rates of hypertension among them. It's very rare in that sort of a society. They actually sleep better. And some of these some of these communities, they don't even have a word for insomnia because it's extremely rare. And so, wow. It kind of speaks to how we have the potential to live a long lifespan, free of those chronic diseases that we've come to think of as normal.
So I think you are talking about the blue zones, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I was really excited when I read that in your book, because this is exciting to look at. And most people who talk about the blue zone, they talk about the nutrition, what kind of food they eat, high plant diet, low meat, animal protein diet. But there's one aspect of the diet they don't seem to talk about, which is happiness. And you do break down why those people are happy and what to do about happiness in those populations. So can you tell us a bit about what is the role of happy lifestyle, happiness
Yeah.
is of our health.
Yeah, that's a great question because it really what I think you're referring to the work of Dan Buettner, who is a National Geographic
Yes.
journalist, and he went and kind of went around the world looking at where people live the longest, and then he did a separate study of where people live the healthiest, and so and the happiest. I'm sorry. So the people that live the healthiest and healthiest and longest, and then the people who live the happiest. And what he did is he basically circled some of these areas with a blue marker and called those the blue zones. And so that's kind of how that name originated. But it's a fascinating study. And basically, what he finds is that many of these blue zone countries or blue zone areas are are places where people tend to naturally sort of exercise, and they don't have they tend to have whole foods. They just don't have as many options of not having those things available to them. So, for example, if you were to ask them why are they, what is their secret to living such a long life, a lot of them don't seem to know. And the reason for that is that it's kind of built into their everyday life. So, for example, you and I probably, and I'm not sure, most of us, we get up in the morning and we drive to work, right? And that's just our lifestyle, is that we get up, go into the garage and take out our car and go to work. Well, some of these places, you just have to walk to work because there's not another option. And so, it kind of points to how we have kind of chased or pursued convenience and sort of mindlessly robbed ourselves of the opportunity for exercise. The larger point that Dan Buettner also makes is that the places where people are the happiest are also largely coincide with where they're the healthiest. Health has a big impact on happiness. It's not the end all of happiness, but it's definitely a factor that heavily impacts our ability to be happy.
And, and and I agree with that. It makes sense to me. And when I went to France some time ago, one of the things that really struck me is they would spend an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours drinking some wine and over a meal and having friendship. It seems that they see friendship, family in a different way that we do it. I mean, kids, you eat in 5, 10 minutes and you're back to work, you're on the road, and we don't
Yes.
take time to spend with our family and friends.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's you point to something important to talk about, which is how we tend to mistake the pursuit of happiness with the pursuit of pleasurable things, and so
Yeah.
this is kind of what kind of starts us on a path to our struggle. So if you look at the best things in life, those things that really do impact happiness, there's actually a lot of research about what those things are, and it turns out that most of those things are free of cost.
Can
It's
you give us some examples of what we could
Yeah,
do to improve and increase our happiness?
yeah. So there's sort of a commonality among those factors that affect happiness. They seem to be those things that engage either our body or mind or soul in some way. So, for example, things that require us to exercise. Exercise tends to improve our state of well-being.
Yeah.
Same thing with pursuing, basically pursuing a goal, having good social relations. Those are things that largely are free of cost. And
Yeah.
and so, one of the fundamental points I try to make in the book is that many of the things that we're pursuing, we're kind of we're kind of shortchanging ourselves because we tend to mistake pleasure for happiness, and by pursuing those pleasurable things, we end up uh, buying into things that make us unhealthy. So things like fast food, for example, would be a classic example. Once again, pursuing convenience and losing out on the opportunity for exercise, shortchanging sleep, those things that adversely affect our health.
Yeah. I think your comment really ties in into my next point. One
Mhm.
of the things I really like about your book is you take a different spin on health because I read a lot of books on health. It's more or less the same thing, what to eat, when not to eat, the toxins, different things. But you started talking about finances and
Mm.
happiness. And I want to talk a little bit about that because this graph from your chapter number 7 really struck me. So this is the level of happiness per GDP, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would believe that if you are richer, you have more money, you will be
Mm.
happier.
Mm.
But this shows the complete opposite at the end of the day.
You're right. On that blue line, we saw that GDP was going up year after year after year, and yet our collective sense of happiness is actually declining a little bit. That's a graph of the U.S. And largely that's what we're seeing across the board. That beyond a certain level of GDP, additional growth in GDP doesn't seem to improve our happiness. It actually may adversely affect happiness. And so, you might recall the title of the book. It said that this is a doctor's prescription for living beyond diet and exercise. And just to comment on that, so largely we've been following an economist's prescription for living or a politician's prescription for living. We've been chasing GDP growth, right? And
Yeah.
so every politician across the world, really, if you look at the G7 countries, the G20 gatherings, it's all about growing GDP. Now, if you're on the right of the political spectrum, it's about growing GDP, and that's kind of the main focus. If you're on the left of the spectrum, you're trying to grow GDP and maybe make it a little bit more even. But in this book, what I kind of point to is that we were never really after GDP. It's not. It's really our well-being that we were after, and so inherently we have this desire for being happy, but we've kind of mistaken that desire with and conflated it with our with pleasure, and as a result, we tend to chase improving GDP, and in the process, adversely affecting our health.
That's something that I have seen too many times, actually. People, I mean, I have colleagues or people or, MDs, doctors, attorneys, like good paying job. They have all the money they want,
Yes.
but they cannot find the happiness.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is so unfortunate.
Yeah. So there is a correlation between money and happiness to an extent. If you look at what that is, there is, and a lot of studies have been done on the subject. Basically, you do need some basic level of income to be able to meet your basic needs, including, food and water and shelter and security. But once you've had those basic needs met, money really has very limited impact on improving our happiness. There are some important nuances to be able to point out, which I won't go into because it's in the book, but not necessarily needed in this format. But basically, beyond that level after which we've satisfied our basic needs, we should actually be not necessarily looking to increase our GDP, or in a personal case necessarily looking to become as rich as possible. Those things that we're doing to become as rich as possible is actually adversely affecting our health. So let me give you an example.
Yeah.
We're working, and if you look at 100 years ago, compared to people living 100 years ago, we are 100 times more productive.
Yeah.
But we're actually working almost just as long as they were. And when you think about it, our jobs are very sedentary. There's minimal attention to our diet because we don't have the time to cook. We don't tend to sleep as well as our ancestors did, and as a result, we kind of tied ourselves in a sort of lifestyle that wasn't necessary and isn't necessary for any individual who wants to opt out. They actually can. And how is that? That's by being mindful of this tendency for us to pursue, this mindless consumerism, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
And if we can get a hold of that, then the income that we're generating in 21st century America, if we're investing some of that instead of mindlessly pursuing, pleasure, and adversely affecting our health, if we're able to invest some of that, we're actually able to achieve a state of independence from a need for additional money.
Yeah.
And once you don't have to worry about money the next day, then you can actually you can actually you can push back on an employer who demands a certain number of work, for certain set work hours. You don't have to be dependent on that. You have time to be able to put yourself first, put your health first, be able to cook, be able to, do the things to prepare a healthier meal for your family. And so there's a lot of benefits that I talk about in the book as a result of being able to be a little bit more mindful of how we're spending our money.
Yes, I have to say that from my point of view, since the beginning of the pandemic, right, a lot of people have been struggling financially.
Yes.
Some of my clients lost their job, lost their house. It's really unfortunate. I have been blessed to be able to work and see my clients, no
Yeah.
problem. And I realized that sometimes I would give some monies to some people who need it. They are really struggling. And to me, that's part of happiness.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I sleep better at night. It's like, wow. I think
Yes.
that's what we need to do, helping each other.
Dr. Zurich, there's a lot of research that backs up what you're saying there, that being able to give charitably actually improves our happiness. So I might have made the point too quickly that beyond a certain level of income, money doesn't affect our happiness. But one of the caveats to that is that there is one thing that you could do beyond a certain level that does impact your happiness with money, and that is being able to give charitably. And so that charitable giving does seem to be one of those factors that does benefit us, both in terms of you as the giver and the person who's receiving it. And so that's a win-win on both sides.
Wow, that's awesome. That's good news. I think right now, with everything going on, it's really important as human to unify and get together and support each other.
That's right.
That's the only way to make it. Um, I was reading some statistics some time ago about knowledge, right? And the author was saying that 20 years ago, it would take about 100 years to double our knowledge. And they found out that today it takes about 11 hours not to double our human knowledge. So science is advancing so rapidly. On the other side, it seems that more science we do and more research we do, less able we are able to reverse chronic situation, chronic diseases. So what's going on with that? It doesn't make sense, right?
At some level. So I'll just point out an important caveat here that I mentioned at the start of our talk that chronic disease is increasing, and pointed to the examples of diabetes and hypertension and colon cancer and a number of other diseases. Well, I don't doubt the ability of science to eventually be able to cure those diseases.
Yeah.
Okay, so science, with the advancement of science, we'll be able to one day cure diabetes and cure Alzheimer's and things that we can't even imagine that are possible. So, I want to kind of emphasize the importance of science
Yes.
But at the same time, if we're looking at that to improve our health and well-being, okay, so there's chronic disease, which we can improve with science, but in terms of our health and well-being, the things that we need, we already have. They're already perfect for us. We have healthy whole foods out there. We just need to consume it. We have the ability to exercise. We just need to be free enough to be able to step away from our desks that we're tied to from 8 to 5 every day, followed by sitting in traffic to and from work. But if we were freed from that, we have the ability to be able to exercise. We have the ability to sleep. We have these artificial environments which are constantly stimulating us. And so, unfortunately, in our society, insomnia is a very common term that everybody knows of. But again, some of those prehistoric societies, you ask them what, to come up with a word for insomnia, and they actually don't have it in their vocabulary at all. So I guess what I'm pointing to is science, or technological improvement or the advancement of science is not necessarily what we need now. We have the things that we need. We just need to be able to be free enough to implement those.
I like the statement you just made, actually, because a lot of people know what needs to be done, but they don't take the first step
Yeah.
to do what they need to do. So
Yeah.
what would be a piece of advice for people who are listening to us that they could do right now as the first step?
Yeah. So, let me answer that in a bit of a context here. So, in the book, I talk about how there's a researcher. His name is um, Brian Wansink, and he wrote a book, Slim by Design. And the point is that if you're relying on your willpower to be able to do whatever pursuit you're trying to do, um, it's awfully hard. Okay, but if you try to just optimize the environment around you, you're much more likely to succeed. So in other words, one of the experiments he carried out was he had this a desk where secretaries are sitting right next to some candy, and when this candy is sitting there right in front of the secretary, she's much more likely to grab a handful of it. But if you take that candy and you put it inside the desk drawer, or you set it up, 20 feet away, suddenly, he actually measured the candy consumption, and what he found is a dramatic improvement, right? It's much less. And so the point is that if we optimize the environment for healthy living, then we're much more likely to be able to be successful with that than if we rely on just pure willpower. So
That's a good point. This is something that I hear all the time from my client is they would tell me if I have candies or sugar in the house, I will eat it. If I don't have
yeah.
it in the house, I won't eat it. That's so true, right? Because our willpower is not that strong when you think about it.
That's right. It's just a matter of time. You have to put up that willpower day after day after day. It's easier to just optimize the environment. And the larger point that I'm trying to make in the book is one of the things about optimize the environment really has to do with optimizing the way we're spending our money. This mindless pursuit of convenience, this mindless pursuit of pleasure, those things are robbing us of the opportunity to be healthy and to live the healthy, full life that we are inherently capable of.
Wow, yes. So thank you for that. So as a closing remark, it's up to you. What do you want to say to conclude this episode?
Sure, please. If you guys can, please read the book, Health in Flames.
Which is on the screen, yes.
It's available. Actually, today is the day that it was published, and Dr. Serge was the first person to interview me. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that opportunity.
Thank you to you.
And if you could read the book and post a review for me. Also, please come to the website, www.healthinflames.com. And I'd like to suggest that there's a way, and we didn't really get to it in this talk, but there's a way that we can benefit not just an individual, any individual who wants to opt out of this consumer-oriented lifestyle, this mindless consumer-oriented lifestyle, can do so by being mindful of their spending. But there's a way which we can benefit society as a whole. And so this is a much more ambitious goal than benefiting just the individual. I want you guys to join me. Come to the website. If you're really inspired after you read the book, reach out to me. Let me know that, because I want to try to get us to organize into a way that we can bring about these benefits for the larger society as a whole. So
one of the neat things that I really like about your book is at the end of each chapter, you make us think about what we need to do as an individual. You ask questions to open up discussions. So that was something unique as well about your book.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I actually had a good suggestion from one of my editors. He suggested that, and so I got to credit them for that. But the other part of it is that it's actually tied in with certain things that we know about retaining what we learn. And so I make a point earlier in the book that if you read through those questions, you work through those, you're more likely to retain some of the information that you learn. And hopefully you find that as enlightening, as helpful as the book itself.
So where can we find your book? On your website?
You can find it on my website, www.healthinflames.com. You can find it on Amazon, or any major online retailer also carries it.
Okay. Awesome. So thank you so much, Doc. That was a really good discussion, and good luck with your book. People need to know this information. It's unique. I really like that book. You guys, if you have any question, you can reach out to Dr. George. Is here to help people to get better. So thank you and have a good day.
Thank you so much, sir. Really appreciate it. I love the interview. Appreciate your time.
Thank you to you.